This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Former Congolese militia leader convicted by the International Criminal Court. Insecurity in northern Nigeria forces over 3 million children out of school. And refugees in Libya launch hunger strike demanding evacuation. Hello everyone, welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall in Nairobi. Also ahead on the program. Coming up in your business news, Botswana introduces a range of new laws to attract both local and foreign investment. And in sports, 1992 and 2015 champions Cote D'Ivoire and 2004 champions Tunisia through to the quarterfinals of the ongoing Africa Cup of Nations. Let's begin with the news from the International Criminal Court. The international prosecutor Fatou Bensouda is seeking war crimes charges against a Mali suspect. Bensouda has asked judges to approve war crimes and crimes against humanity charges against Al-Hassan Ag Abdul Aziz over atrocities in Mali's city of Timbuktu. They include destroying cultural monuments and enforcing policies that led to the sexual enslavement of women and girls during a 2012-2013 rebel takeover of the city. Bensouda argues that the abuses constituted crimes against humanity and war crimes according to the Rome Statute. But the defense lawyers maintain his innocence, saying his case should be dismissed before it begins. Judges are yet to set a date for a decision.
As soon as they took over the city, members of the Ansar Deen and Akim created bodies of control and repression. In particular, they created the Islamic police, of which Al-Hassan Abdulaziz, suspected before this court, was the de facto head, inescapable and zealous. They subjugated the men and women of Timbuktu to their power, invoking and above all imposing their religious views, making great use of brutality and abuses that constitute crime against humanity and war crimes according to the Rome Statute.
But the prosecutor has conducted its investigations into the events in Timbuktu with its eyes wide shut.
Well, prosecutor Fatou Bensouda's call to charge the Mali suspect comes just a day after the ICC found Bosco Ntaganda guilty of war crimes. The former Congolese militia commander is the fourth person to be convicted by the ICC of atrocities which took place in the DRC's Ituri province between 2002 and 2003.
Barely a ripple of emotion on the face of Bosco Ntaganda, the former Congolese warlord and former alleged deputy chief of the Patriotic Force for the Liberation of Congo, as the International Criminal Court in The Hague delivered its judgment.
The chamber found that UPC FPLC's conduct against the civilian population was not the result of an uncoordinated and spontaneous decision of individual soldiers on the ground. It was the intended outcome of a preconceived strategy, as part of which the Lendu population was specifically targeted.
After 248 days at trial, the court found the man dubbed the Terminator guilty beyond all reasonable doubt for 13 counts of war crimes and 5 counts of crimes against humanity for acts committed in Ituri province in the Democratic Republic of Congo between August 2002 and December 2003. The rap sheet against Ntaganda include directing attacks against civilians, using rape as a war crime, displacement of a population and enlisting child soldiers. For the court in The Hague, Monday's ruling proved their ability to deliver justice.
What is important, I think, is to highlight that justice is about respecting the rights of the victims, but also the rights of the defense. And if there is a reasonable doubt, then it is its duty to declare this person innocent. And if not, as we have seen today, the trial judges have decided that there is no reasonable doubt about the guilt of Mr. Ntaganda, and that's why they declared him guilty.
Bosco Ntaganda will remain in the ICC's detention until sentencing. He also has 30 days to lodge any appeal. But for a court long criticised for not delivering justice, this pronouncement also created a first-time conviction for sexual slavery. Mariam Zaidi, CGTN, The Hague.
Meanwhile, survivors of Ntaganda's atrocities have been speaking out. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa spoke to victims and other citizens about Ntaganda's guilty verdict.
Nancy Gemma is a mother of two living in Kinshasa. Her family moved to the DRC capital in 2003 after violence broke out in their hometown of Bunia. She's a survivor of the atrocities committed by rebels of the Union for Congolese Patriots, a militia group led by Bosco Ntaganda.
That man really tortured us. He wanted to kill me. If it wasn't for God, I would be dead by now. I'm very happy that the ICC has found him guilty of the atrocities he committed.
The ICC convicted Bosco Ntaganda of 13 counts of war crimes and 5 counts of crimes against humanity. Like Nancy, many other Congolese are excited about the verdict.
He deserves to be imprisoned because he massacred our parents and our brothers and sisters in Bunia.
We are very grateful to the ICC judges for convicting that wizard, that thief who killed so many of our people.
Ntaganda's militia backed the Hema ethnic group and was accused of carrying out targeted killings against the Lendu community in Ituri province. Renewed fighting between the two communities broke out last month, forcing more than 300,000 people to flee their homes. The verdict of the ICC has been welcomed by many Congolese who've been yearning to see an end to impunity by warlords and justice for the victims, especially in the east of the country. The court will schedule hearings in the coming weeks to determine Ntaganda's sentence and the reparations for victims. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
While the International Criminal Court investigation in the Democratic Republic of Congo began in 2004, its focus was on leaders of armed militia and rebel groups suspected of war crimes and crimes against humanity. The DRC ratified the Rome Statute in April of 2002, which is the treaty that established the International Criminal Court. Since then, there have been several prosecutions of former Congolese militia leaders. CGTN's Robert Nagila has more on that.
The first landmark ICC trial against Congolese militia leader was that of Thomas Lubanga. Lubanga was charged with conscripting child soldiers to fight. He was convicted of war crimes in March 2012 and sentenced to 14 years imprisonment to be completed in the DRC. Rebel leader Jermaine Katanga was convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity over an attack in Bogora village in Ituri, eastern Congo, in which 200 civilians were killed. He was imprisoned for 12 years. Among those acquitted are the alleged executive secretary of the FLDR rebel group, Caliste Mbarushimana, who was released from ICC custody in December 2011 after the pre-trial chamber declined to confirm charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Alleged Congolese militia leader Mathieu Chewe was also acquitted at the ICC of crimes against humanity and war crimes in December 2012.
In Nigeria, at least 13 civilians have been reportedly killed and many others injured during an air raid by the Nigerian military on the insurgent group Boko Haram in the northeastern part of the country. Here's Phili Haza with that report.
According to one military official speaking anonymously, the civilians were caught in a line of airstrikes by the Air Force during a raid to support ground troops warding off an attack from militants in Borno State, northeast Nigeria. The official blamed residents for flouting military orders to remain indoors after receiving intelligence that there was an impending attack in Nganzai local government area of the state. A top military officer in charge of the operation, Brigadier General Buloma Abiu, denied any reports of casualties but confirmed that a faction of Boko Haram known as Islamic State of West Africa African province ISWAP tried to infiltrate a military facility. He says the militants met stiff resistance from troops with the support of the fighter jet, which destroyed 6 enemy trucks and captured 2 insurgents. Although no terrorist group has claimed the attack, since July last year, ISWAP has intensified attacks on military targets, killing dozens of soldiers and overrunning bases. Human Rights Watch says over 20,000 people have lost their lives and more than 2 million more have been displaced in the past 10 years of the fight against insurgency in Nigeria. There have been recent attacks on military formations and targets like worship centers, despite government's claim to have decimated Boko Haram. Fiole Haza, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
And we'll stay in Nigeria for the moment. And the violent conflicts as a result of Boko Haram terrorist attacks in northern Nigeria has forced about 3 million children out of school. One school in Jos, though, is providing support to children displaced by the conflict. CGTN Samson Omale reports.
Zambiri Outreach and Childcare Center in Jos was established 10 years ago. It provides free education, accommodation, health and feeding to internally displaced children.
It's a care center. We care for them like we care for our children. We supply all their needs. We, buy their uniforms. We make their sweaters. They don't pay any school fees. We feed them. Children play after they want to eat some snacks and all of. We do all of that. Whatever we do with our children, that is what we do with these children.
Zambiri is funded by Gloria and her husband, along with some donations. Many of these children came to Zambiri traumatized, hungry and sick. Now they are not only being fed properly, they are finding healing and hope. The violent attacks in northern Nigeria caused by the activities of Boko Haram and herders is leading to an increase in the number of out-of-school children. But for the victims of the attack like this ones behind me, they are having the opportunity to live out their dreams once more as a result of the Zambiri Center. Samson Luka is 14 years old. His education was disrupted when a religious crisis in his village left him an orphan.
The reason why I came to Zambia was because of a crisis that happened in our village. So I was there when it happens, and I lived with my mother and my father, and all of them were killed at the crisis with my 3 brothers and 4 sisters. So I was the only surviving child.
Samson is one of the over 500 children with similar stories in Zambiri who now access formal education in an environment that prepares them for regular examinations.
Some of them may be stepped down as a result of, the movement from here to there may not meet up with the time they are supposed to be in particular classes. So when we see the performances of some of them, we will have to drop them to the right class they should be.
Thanks to Gloria and the Zambiri Outreach and Care Center, Samson hopes to study medicine at the university. He's hoping that one day he will save the lives of many other children like him. Samson Omale, CGTN, Jos, Nigeria.
Let's go to Libya now, where refugees who survived a deadly airstrike last week are demanding to be evacuated for fear of further attacks. More than 50 people were killed and dozens others wounded in the air raid at a detention center in the suburb of Tajura. Survivors are now on hunger strike in a bid to push international bodies to ensure they are relocated to a safer place. The United Nations has said they will move them to another center in a safer part of the city, but they have rejected this as a temporary measure rather than a long-term solution. Meanwhile, fighting continues between the UN-backed Government of National Accord in Tripoli and the self-styled Libyan National Army. The LNA forces have announced the dispatch of more reinforcements to the south of the capital, Tripoli, after facing a major setback in the nearby town of Garian. CGTN's Daniela Pearson reports.
Libya remains split between 2 warring powers. The UN-backed government in Tripoli, led by Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj, and the self-styled Libyan National Army under General Khalifa Haftar. Since April, the LNA has been attempting to liberate the capital Tripoli from what the group claims are extremist and terrorist militias.
Today, of course, the militia and the terrorist groups tried to attack our forces at the axis of the so-called Algeria near the airport road, but were defeated. We destroyed 2 vehicles carrying anti-aircraft guns, as well as a number of other armed vehicles. They were also defeated in Ain Zara.
The General Command of the LNA has announced the dispatch of more military battalions and reinforcements. These have been sent as part of the LNA's Flood of Dignity operation, launched in April to capture Tripoli. According to the LNA's Military Information Division, the latest movements of forces are part of a second wave of attacks in combat operations.
A number of other elite forces of the Libyan Arab Armed Forces, battalions, and units were pushed to the front lines for the purpose of increasing the pace of performance and, of course, to carry out the task of entering the capital, which would be swift and like a flood to eliminate the remaining gangs and seize control.
These reinforcements come less than 2 weeks after Haftar's forces were driven out of the strategic town of Garyan. The town was being used as a base to launch attacks on the capital Tripoli. The UN Health Agency has said the death toll from fighting around the capital has reached nearly 1,000 since Haftar launched his offensive on April 4th. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. 1 year after peace deal, Eritrea-Ethiopia reflect on the milestones of the 2018 peace deal. And the World Peace Forum kicks off in Beijing.
Nigeria is my home. 160 million vibrant, ambitious individuals constantly seeking the perfect self-expression. It is these people who inspired me to be that person that is seen, to be a voice that is heard, and ultimately to be the anchor that I am. I have to tap in, tune in, and turn on the very best qualities within me to deliver the news. I'm Richard Nta, an anchor for CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
It's been 1 year since Eritrea and Ethiopia mended relations. The leaders of both countries signed a joint declaration of peace and friendship, and a historic summit marked a start to the normalization of ties between the longtime foes. While 12 months on, the citizens in the East African nation have been reflecting on the impact of peace on their lives. CGTN's Brian Toussaint has that story.
A group of young Eritrean men are playing a heated game of football on the outskirts of the town of Mekelle in northern Ethiopia. Just a year ago, this would have been impossible. War broke out between Eritrea and Ethiopia in 1998 over the border and other issues. The conflict killed an estimated 80,000 people before fighting ended in 2000 in a contested peace deal. Tensions burned on over the position of the frontier until Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy offered to end the military standoff last year as part of a package of reforms. The former enemies reopened crossing points on their shared border for the first time in 20 years, cementing the stunning reconciliation. Abiy and Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki signed a breakthrough agreement in Asmara on July 9, 2018 that restored ties. Awet Gide works in a small bar in Mekelle as a DJ. His mother traveled with him to Eritrea when he was just 2 years old. The war broke out while they were there, and he only got to see his father again last year.
The joy of meeting your parents after 20 years is endless. I wish that this happiness could continue. But opening the borders and then closing it again is not a good idea. I want to go there and come back as much as I like.
Tens of thousands of Eritreans have traveled into Ethiopia in the last 12 months.
The past year has been very good because many families were united. Some children have a father in Eritrea and a mother in Ethiopia, or vice versa. Families are especially excited to reunite after almost 30 years. They might have reasons to close the border sometimes, but I would have liked it to remain open.
I had a daughter there. I left her there with her Eritrean mother. After the reconciliation, I immediately crossed to Eritrea to reunite with my wife and my daughter. These are all kids of my friends whom I left there. Since I opened this restaurant, my clients are all Eritreans.
Eritrea reopened its embassy in Ethiopia in July last year. Ethiopia reciprocated in September. A year on both countries' citizens reconciling, forging friendships, and pacing themselves through the region's change. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
Well, let's look at the gains of this relationship a year on. I'm joined by Matthias Mwindi. He's an independent political risk analyst based here in Nairobi and specializing on the Horn of Africa and the Great Lakes region. Matthias, thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. Now, it was hailed as a historic period for Ethiopia and Eritrea after decades of hostilities. In your opinion, though, what have been the gains that have been made from the Ethiopian-Eritrea resetting of relations?
One of the biggest gains from this rapprochement was the diffusion of tension between Ethiopia and Eritrea on the common border. It was one of the borders which has been heavily policed. There's almost tens and thousands of troops which have been deployed there. Most of those troops have since been moved away. So that tension has subsided, although it has not gone away. The other thing is that these two countries were now forced to look back at some of the other domestic issues facing them. The issue between Ethiopia and Eritrea was not just the only one. So Ethiopia, we have seen in the last 1 year, has other serious security issues. So with the rapprochement, it has been able to focus on that. And finally, for Eritrea, Ethiopia was able to maybe end the international diplomatic isolation of Eritrea by bringing the country from the cold.
The Horn of Africa region and the East African region, had a sigh of relief as well during that period. What's been the regional impact of that historic rapprochement?
One of the biggest impact by what the Prime Minister of Ethiopia has done was forcing the region to refocus on the other instability issues which have been going on. For example, there has been border disputes between Eritrea and Djibouti, which has been going on for a very long time. Suddenly, with this rapprochement, East African region was forced to, let's think about this border. Can we also solve that? The other issue was that it also brought to fore that some of the rebel groups which had been operating in either country, whether you're in Ethiopia or whether in Eritrea, they stopped doing that. So suddenly, the regional stability and the regional security started, the tension started easing, based on what happened last year in July.
Looking at that tension that's been easing, though, we do understand that the situation along the Ethiopian-Eritrean border remains rather tense. What do you know?
It is very tense, especially since May. In May, Eritrea closed some of the closing border points, but it has not closed the entire border. There has not been redeployment of the troops as the situation was last year, but that tension still persists. What has happened, however, is that the Ethiopian Prime Minister said, we are not going to close this border. We are going to have dialogue with Eritrea, and we are going to see how we are going to reopen this border. Because the factors which led to the closure of this border was there was illegal migration, which just suddenly spiked with the opening of the border, and the criminal groups also started operating along the border. So the Ethiopian government wants those issues addressed, and then they can now look at reopening the border regions.
So the process is ongoing and there's still quite a lot to be thrashed out. But if you look at the future, though, moving forward, how do you envision this relationship between Ethiopia and Eritrea moving forward?
This relationship, what has happened since last year in July is going to remain. There's been international goodwill, which has made it very, very possible for Eritrea and Ethiopia to have this conversation. As long as the Prime Minister Abiy is in power in Ethiopia, relations with Eritrea will remain good. But the biggest challenge is going to come up next year when Abiy faces an election. If he wins that election, what we are seeing currently is going to go on. If he loses that election, this rapprochement is going to face its most serious test, because we do not know who is going to take power in Ethiopia in May next year.
All right, the region is definitely going to be watching that election then next year in Ethiopia. Matthias Mwindi joining us here on Africa Live. Thank you very much for your insights. Well, let's stay in the Horn of Africa region and move on to Somalia now, where top military generals have been meeting in Mogadishu to discuss military operations and cooperation in ending militant attacks. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilo with that story from Mogadishu.
This is the first meeting by defense chiefs from the Somali army and representatives from some of the troop-contributing countries of AMISOM since the adoption of a new concept of operation by the multinational peacekeeping force early in the year.
You took commitment 3 months ago to undertake certain operations. It is important that we see what are the results of those operations. What challenges are you facing as you try to implement those operations? What do you need from the leadership? What are you not getting from the leadership? And where are you going from now? This is very, very important. And we are here to make sure that you succeed in your operation.
The meeting comes just 3 months after government forces liberated territories in the Lower Shabelle region, from which militant group Al-Shabaab used as a base to attack security forces and launch deadly attacks in Mogadishu. The commanders met in the capital to review the outcome of recent operations and discuss ways to implement the next phase of the operation, despite a reduction in the force number. The UN Security Council wants 1,000 troops withdrawn by February next year so as to empower the country's forces to take over security responsibilities from AMISOM. A similar number was withdrawn earlier this year, mainly from the Burundian contingent. Somali forces captured Barire, Sabid and Anole near Mogadishu, a move AMISOM commanders attribute to the improved security in the capital.
The capture of the 3 towns in Lower Shabelle region has significantly reduced the detonation of EID and mortar attacks that Mogadishu used to suffer from before the period under review.
Handing over army bases to government forces was also one of the main requirements in the transition plan. So far, AMISOM was withdrawn from the Mogadishu Stadium and this army base in the capital and have handed them both to the Somali police force. The Somali government says that it's in the final stages of restructuring its national army as the international community gradually winds down the decade-long mission that has been operating in the country. Earlier this week, the government embarked on a major task of integrating Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, a pro-government militia group based in central Somalia. These forces from the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah have managed to overpower Al-Shabaab, denying the group a chance to expand its area of operation. It's this kind of initiatives that the Somali government hopes will address insecurity in the country and put an end to militant attacks. Abdulaziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has begun a tour of Africa. Guterres is already in Kenya, where he's set to address a counter-terrorism conference in Nairobi. The regional meeting seeks to counter terror threats and ways of preventing extremism. According to a UN spokesperson, Stefan Dujarric, Guterres will hold talks with President Uhuru Kenyatta before meeting with Kenyan youth in a town hall session. The UN chief will later leave for Mozambique and meet with President Filipe Nyusi in Maputo. He's also expected to visit Beira and talk to survivors of cyclones Idai and Kenneth. He will also be briefed on the ongoing recovery efforts in Mozambique. The World Peace Forum has begun in Beijing. Attendees of the 2-day meeting will take a close look at international security issues. Wang Hui has more.
Diplomats from more than 50 countries, as well as hundreds of international experts and academics, are in the Chinese capital this week for the World Peace Forum, a meeting which analyzes global security issues and looks ways to resolve them. Chinese Vice President Wang Qishen addressed the opening ceremony, in which he reiterated Beijing's position on global security and economic development.
China will firmly walk on the path of peaceful development. China will never seek hegemony in the world or try to expand its territory or its sphere of influence. Countries should facilitate economic globalization and construct a more fair, reasonable, stable and effective international order.
China has long been an advocate of multilateralism, and this is something former President of the European Council, Herman Van Rompuy, also championed.
But we have to solve the problems not by waging a trade war, but by dialogue. And everybody is firm in the defense of his national interests. There's nothing wrong with that. As long as you try to understand the position of the others, and as long as you want an agreement. That's why this couple of firmness and dialogue is that important.
The World Peace Forum was created in 2012. It's China's first non-official high-level annual forum on international security. Its purpose is to look at international security issues and offer advice on security cooperation. Wang Hui, CGTN, Beijing.
And coming up in your business news. Botswana introduces a range of new laws to attract both local and foreign investments. And Nigeria's central bank orders banks to lend more money or face stiff regulations.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
AfricaLive. Find your voice.
Botswana has introduced new policies aimed at creating an attractive investment climate to lure both foreign and domestic investors. The move is part of the Southern African state's strategy to diversify its economy, which has been dependent on diamond mining for decades. With the details, here's CGTN's Daniel Arapmoy.
Botswana's Investment and Trade Authority says that the Southern African country is now open and ready for big foreign investments to revive its economy that has for many years relied on diamond mining. According to Reginald Tebogo, Botswana's Investment and Trade Center Chief Operations Officer, the country's strict laws on corruption will go a long way in setting the pace for economic transformation in Botswana.
We pride ourselves with low levels of corruption. Currently, we are the second least corrupt country in Africa, according to Transparency International, which to me is a selling proposition for investors who are interested in considering Botswana for investment.
Botswana is currently continuing to direct efforts towards implementing new reforms with a view to easing doing business in the country. The country is aiming at attracting not only foreign direct investment, but also much needed local investors with the ultimate goal of ensuring prosperity for all, which is Gabron's Vision 2036 aspiration.
Most of the big projects here are done by foreign companies, so which necessarily clearly shows that we are very, very open to attracting even bigger companies to come and operate in Botswana. You would realize that for small maintenance projects, they are also open for local businessmen, so that we grow our productive capacity as a country to be able to respond adequately to the development challenges that are facing our country.
The construction industry has also been revived and is now acting as one of the areas the government is looking up to stimulate the economy and create jobs. The construction industry is being seen as key to providing infrastructure support to the national economy to power the country's sustained and accelerated modernization drive. The construction industry in Botswana has had a phenomenal growth, particularly in the last 2 decades. Daniel Arapmoy, CGTN, Gabron, Botswana.
Uganda has signed a new labor agreement with the United Arab Emirates to improve the working conditions of its citizens there. Labor exporting firms in Uganda and their foreign partners in the United Arab Emirates will be liable for workers they take on. This follows reports of human rights abuses, including sexual harassment, poor pay and heavy workload. Isabel Nakiria reports from Kampala.
Rose Naziri's employment in Jordan took a physical toll. She worked 10 hours a day, was sexually harassed and sometimes beaten when she was too tired to continue. Naziri says she gave up and attempted suicide.
I could not stand the mistreatment, working long hours without meals. She beat me up, almost removing my eye. I ran off and ended up jumping from the 3rd floor and broke my left leg.
Every year, hundreds of girls are trafficked from Africa to Arab countries in search for jobs. Labor agencies in Uganda work with foreign firms to recruit girls as domestic workers. Unlike Naziri, many girls return with injuries. Their employers allegedly torture some to death. The 2 years Naziri spent in Jordan is an experience she lives to regret. She's now recuperating, but she worries she may be left with permanent scars. Naziri returned to Uganda without a penny. She says the labor agency took away the money she earned, accusing her of not completing her 2-year contract. Naziri's contract was written in Arabic and she signed it without understanding the contents.
My worst time there was during winter. They would expect you to go out and scrub verandas every day. I asked them to allow me to do that once a week and they refused. And when I reported to the Labour office, I was beaten up.
Uganda's Ministry of Labour has so far accredited 65 labour firms to recruit domestic workers. The agreement with the UAE is meant to ensure the protection of workers during their contracts. Employees will now report abuses to the labour authorities in the UAE for action. But campaigners say this won't solve the problem.
But we should consider their lives, their working condition. Does the law favor these girls? Is the condition going to be the same as we are seeing? No, one is not supposed to work with a phone, without phone. You're not supposed to have your traveling documents. It's quite embarrassing. Your documents, you don't know where they are. The passports, I mean. You're just there like a slave.
Uganda already has running agreements with Jordan and Saudi Arabia. However, the allegations of torture continue. The Labour Ministry warns against using unlicensed employment agencies. For Naziri, it's not over yet, as she stays on medication with the hope of taking away the pain caused by what she went through abroad. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala.
Recently, Nigeria's central bank issued a directive to deposit money banks offering in the country to lend more or risk having their cash reserve ration jerked up. The Apex Bank says commercial banks should use at least 60% of their deposits for loans by the end of September. So what does this mean for businesses in Nigeria? Here's CGTN's Deji Badmus.
If there's one sector where the new directive by the central bank is expected to have more impact, it is local manufacturing. Manufacturers had long complained about the near absence of credit facilities in Nigerian banks, giving rise to prohibitive lending rates and forcing some manufacturers to close shop. Analysts now say the new directive could change the story for local manufacturing.
You cannot have a banking system that will operate with a zero tolerance for risk policy. Each time an entrepreneur approaches the bank, sometimes the collateral requirement is as high as 150% of the value of the facility. Or sometimes the entrepreneur has to go and bring a bank guarantee, which is as good as having the cash yourself. So all these things are challenges for development, they are challenges for investment, and I believe that this policy should have a very good positive impact on the flow of funds from the financial system to those who are creating wealth in the economy.
But there are fears that if not managed well, the policy could affect the loan books of commercial banks, shooting up the size of their non-performing loans.
In as much as this initiative is quite commendable in the sense that it will compel banks to consider lending to these sectors, but we also must look at the unintended side effect or negative effect of this, what the policy could actually bring to the economy. You are likely going to see the banks scrambling for good credit customers. In the absence of such good credit customers, the banks will be compelled to begin to patronize or to lend to what we call subprime customers. Then the likelihood that you're going to see an increase in non-performing loan is quite high.
The structure of loan portfolio before now is a situation where we have just about 20% of businesses accounting for about 80% of the credit, which is also not good for purpose of economic inclusion. So this policy is looking at a more diversified portfolio. And when you have a more diversified portfolio, the risk of significant default is also reduced.
At less than 60% at the moment, Nigeria's banks have the lowest loan-to-deposit ratio in Africa, where the average is 78%. While some Nigerian banks have indeed hit the 60% mark, the big five banks are still way behind, something the new policy is essentially aimed at them.
I think there are issues we need to address. One is the issue of interest rates. The interest rate is still high, and at such rates, you may still have high incidence of failure of these credits. Second is the timeline for the implementation of this policy, which is September, at which time you may not have enough good credits in the economy to absorb that. The other factor we have to look at is this, that the growth in the economy is still quite weak. In as much as this is supposed to spur growth, but you also look at the sectors that are available for borrowing activity, that are growing the economy to meet up their loan repayment obligations. Those sectors are very few. But give and take, in spite of these limiting factors, one would say the intention, the motive is good, but needs to be fine-tuned.
Everyone is now waiting to see if the new policy would spark a flurry of loan disbursements in the banking industry. One thing though is certain. Everyone agrees the policy is a good one and could help bolster economic activities in the country. Deji Badmo, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Now, as the China-US trade war continues, consumers and businesses are facing extra costs from tariffs in a broad range of categories, from produce to furniture. Tech firms are also taking a hit, as many of their components are from China. But the trade tensions may be having a greater impact on those companies by hampering their ability to fill important jobs. CGTN's Mark New has more from California.
At universities across the United States, tens of thousands of Chinese students come to study engineering and technology, with hopes of someday finding a job here.
Yes, I want to work here. It's less pressure than China, and also the salary is very high, but I don't know if I can.
When we look at the number of students who are able to find those positions working in companies who are able to receive the work permits they need, we're seeing a decrease in that. We're also seeing an increase in the number of rejections.
One of the hardest hit sectors is semiconductors. According to the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, China imports nearly $300 billion worth of computer chips from U.S. companies annually. Under U.S. rules, foreign nationals, including Chinese, must get special licenses in order to work on sensitive technologies like semiconductors. From 2013 to 2017, Chinese nationals accounted for more than 60% of the approved licenses. But Laurel Munoz says, while it used to take a couple of weeks to get approved, it's now averaging about 6 to 8 months.
It's making it more difficult for companies to get the work they need right away. It's also making the United States and Silicon Valley in particular less attractive as a destination for some of the smartest, most skilled workers from around the world.
The engineer has gotten a visa, they're working for a company, but then the company tries to assign them to a particular project and they can't get onto it because the license is being held up.
Gwenapp says while companies lose out on skilled workers, the region could also lose out on job creation from potential Chinese founders.
Some of them end up starting companies and have had a big impact on Silicon Valley. Weili Dai, who was born in Shanghai, is one of the co-founders of Marvell, which is a large chip company now with over 5,000 employees. Ken Shi, who has founded several companies, including Fortinet, which is one of the largest cybersecurity companies in Silicon Valley, 5,000 employees.
Leroy Munoz says the Trump administration also views access to sensitive technologies as a threat.
They view the situation as, if we don't assert technological dominance now, we risk falling behind China, and the fear on the part of the administration is that that threat also is not only a technology threat, but possibly also a national security threat when we look at issues around artificial intelligence and cybersecurity.
Leroy Munoz's Silicon Valley Leadership Group has more than 350 members, including top chip makers such as Intel and Samsung Semiconductor. He says while members understand the security concerns, they also want the Trump administration to realize the risks and costs of losing out on long-term innovation. Mark News, CGTN, Mountain View, California.
And we still have more news for you here in the program. Here's what's ahead. Nigerian artist Femi Kuti wows the Nairobi audience with his social commentary-rich style of music.
Join us in global business and see Africa through our eyes. The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
"15 years after his first visit to Kenya, Nigerian musician Femi Kuti played an energetic set to an enthusiastic audience in Nairobi. The musician, a son of the legendary Fela Kuti, practices for at least 6 hours every day and continues to reinvent his sound. But the messages rebuking problems in society still remain. Here's CGTN's Wilkista Nyabwa with that story.
His name is Femi Kuti, let's go!
A burst of color announced the arrival of Olufemi Anikulapo Kuto on the Koroga Festival stage. The headlining act of the two-day music festival held periodically in Nairobi, and Fela and his band did not disappoint. This festival, with a mix of younger musicians they knew, would be Femi's introduction to those who are unfamiliar with his music. A four-time Grammy Award nominee and a best-selling musician, Femi Kuti's name has long been associated with musical excellence, and with such concerts he is hoping to introduce himself to a new generation of music lovers.
We come to you with the total understanding that the only way for Africa is unification. Are you with me?
Born 57 years ago, Femi Kuti is a son of the late Nigerian music superstar Fela Kuti. Femi grew up learning from the legend, but in 1987 he left to start his own band. Femi did not want to live in his father's massive shadow.
I left my father because what I saw as a young boy was, imagine my father passed on and I was still in his band. Then I'll have to dress like him, I'll have to dance like him, I'll have to be him. What I've achieved is I have over 130 songs of my own. Many of them are international hits. I've got so many nominations or awards, but this is because I left.
In the typical Afrobeat tradition, Femi combines African genres like highlife along with jazz. He has also reinvented the sound with the infusion of hip-hop. But the songs still retain his father's core lyrical message, speaking up against societal ills.
As Africans, we must love Africa.
And as the ever-energetic musician travels the world playing his music, Sofela is introducing the next generation of musicians. In recent events, his son has joined him on the stage.
You always have to do things to develop, to inspire another generation to tread the path properly. What I want to see is, I want to see my son become greater than I am. I want him to produce music that I will sit back and say, wow.
Through his son, the tradition of music continues, a blend of talent and boldness and sincerity and carefully honed skills that never get old. Bulkisa Nyabo, CGTN.
Well, let's now head to South Africa, where the cultural China Water Cube Cup has just concluded in Cape Town. The Chinese singing contest seeks to promote a sense of patriotism, cultural and linguistic sense amongst the Chinese living in the diaspora. The two top finalists will compete with their contemporaries living in other countries in a gala that will be organized in Beijing later in the year. According to organizers, young participants showed impressive language and music skills.
You can see people, especially the youngsters, they are living abroad, but they love the mother language, they love the mother country. This is kind of way for them to show their respect, their love to the mother country.
And coming up in your sports news,